There are dates in the history of martial arts that everyone knows. The Long Beach Internationals in 1964, the release of Enter the Dragon in 1973. But there is one date, one particular evening in the fall of 1966, that does not appear in the history books. It was not filmed by news cameras. It was not covered by the press. It took place behind the steel, reinforced doors of the San Diego Naval Base. Imagine the room. 200 of the toughest men in the US Navy, officers, combat veterans, men who measured respect by rank and scars. In the center of the room, standing alone in a black kung fu suit, was a 25-year-old man weighing barely 130 pounds. The atmosphere was not friendly, it was hostile. They didn't see a master, they saw an actor, a dancer, and one officer, a man twice Bruce's size, a legend in the field of unarmed combat training, decided it was time to call out the imposter. He stood up. He walked to the center. He didn't want a demonstration. He wanted a fight. He said to Bruce, "Stop dancing. Fight a real martial artist." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The officers smiled, expecting a massacre. They expected Bruce to give up. But what they witnessed lasted only 10 seconds. 10 seconds that destroyed a reputation. 10 seconds that silenced a room full of 200 warriors. 10 seconds that terrified the US Navy so much that they classified the incident report for years. This isn't a scene from a movie. This is the story of the day Bruce Lee entered the lion's den and emerged the only king. To understand why this fight took place, you have to understand the world of 1966. It was before worldwide fame, before the yellow jumpsuit, before Bruce Lee posters were plastered on the walls of teenagers everywhere from Tokyo to Texas. In 1966, Bruce Lee was a man caught between two worlds. To the traditional Chinese masters in Chinatown, he was a rebel, a troublemaker who taught their secrets to outsiders. To the American public, he was just Kato in the Green Hornet, a mere sidekick, a curiosity. But within the martial arts community, rumors were beginning to circulate. There was talk of a young man in Los Angeles who moved faster than the eye could follow, a man who didn't believe in forms or rituals, but in efficiency, brutal, direct efficiency. These rumors reached the ears of Admiral Thomas H. Moore at the San Diego Naval Base. The Navy was looking to revamp its hand-to-hand combat program. It was tired of the old boxing and wrestling manuals dating back to World War I. It wanted something new, something deadly. So an invitation was sent. It wasn't a request to appear as a movie star. It was a challenge disguised as a guest lecture. The invitation simply said, "Demonstration of the effectiveness of close combat." Bruce accepted immediately. He didn't care about the fee. He didn't care about the prestige. Only one thing mattered to him, proving that his method, Jeet Kune, was the ultimate truth in combat. He wanted to test his philosophy against the toughest men America had to offer. He arrived at the base on a rainy Tuesday evening. He drove himself, no escort, no bodyguards. Just Bruce, his gym bag, and his student, Dan Inosanto. When they entered the officers' club, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was no dojo. It was a gathering of the Pacific Fleet's elite. Men with crew cuts, dressed in stiff white uniforms and with arms as thick as tree trunks. Cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. The clinking of glasses stopped when Bruce entered. He looked small in a room full of giants. He seemed almost fragile. Accounts of that evening described the tension as stifling. A retired officer, who was then a junior lieutenant, later wrote in his memoirs, "We looked at this little guy in his Chinese pajamas and thought it was a joke. We were trained to kill with our bare hands. We thought, what can this kid teach us? How to do the splits?" Bruce sensed the lack of respect. It motivated him. He walked to the small raised platform in the center of the room. He did not bow. He didn't ask permission to speak. He simply put down his bag, took off his jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. His forearms were muscular, his veins bulging like steel cables. He scanned the room, his eyes intense, unmoving. He wasn't there to entertain them. He was there to educate them. "Gentlemen," Bruce said in a calm voice that carried to the back of the room without a microphone, "you are trained to fight like machines, mechanical, rigid, predictable." He paused, letting the insults sink in. "I am here to show you how to fight like water." A murmur of laughter rippled through the front row. Water, soft, fluid water. These men respected iron, they respected stone. Sitting in the front row was the man who would become the catalyst for the legendary event of that night, Commander Jack, the Silencer, Sterling. 6 feet 4 inches tall, 240 pounds of muscle. Sterling had been the Navy's heavyweight boxing champion for 3 years. He had hands like hammers and a temper to match. He didn't laugh. He stared at Bruce with pure, unadulterated contempt. Sterling leaned over to the officer next to him and whispered, loud enough for Bruce to hear, "If he mentions water one more time, I'm going to knock him out." Bruce heard him. He stopped mid-sentence. He slowly turned his head and met the gaze of the giant commander. The room fell silent. The air crackled with electricity. The lecture was over. The test was about to begin. Bruce smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted his prey. "Do you have something to share with the class, Commander?" Bruce asked. Sterling stood up, the sound of his chair scraping across the floor echoing like a gunshot. He towered over everyone. He unbuttoned his jacket and threw it on the chair behind him. "I said," Sterling thundered, his voice shaking the walls, "that I'm done with speeches. I'm done with philosophy. In the Navy, we don't fight with metaphors. We fight with our fists." He climbed onto the stage. The wooden planks creaked under his weight. He stood less than a meter away from Bruce, looking down at him, blocking the light. "Why don't you show us what this water can do against real brass knuckles?" The trap was set. The doors were locked, and for the first time that evening, Bruce Lee didn't look like a guest. He looked like an executioner. Most men would have backed away. Standing next to Sterling was like standing next to a cliff. The commander was not only tall, he was also trained for war. His knuckles were marked and calloused from years of punching heavy bags, and probably people too. The situation was physically impossible. Weight classes exist in combat sports for a reason. Sterling weighed nearly 110 pounds more than Bruce. In a street fight, that weight difference is usually fatal. If Sterling caught Bruce, if he could wrap his massive arms around him, speed wouldn't matter. He would crush the smaller man. The officers in the room knew this. They leaned forward in their chairs, some smiling, anticipating the Hollywood actor's humiliation. Others looked genuinely concerned. Dan Inosanto, standing to the side, later recalled tightening his grip on Bruce's gym bag. He knew what Bruce was capable of, but he also knew that a single lucky punch from a man like Sterling could end a career. But Bruce didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He didn't even blink. He stood with his arms relaxed at his sides, breathing deeply and rhythmically. He looked at the giant man's chest, then looked up into his eyes. He was calculating. He was analyzing the data, the range, the reach, the center of gravity, the emotional state. "You want to fight?" Bruce said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "I want to teach you a lesson, son," Sterling sneered, cracking his neck. "I want to show these men the difference between movies and reality. No cables, no director yelling cut, just you and me." Bruce nodded slowly. He bent down and unbuttoned the cuffs of his kung fu jacket. He folded them back with precise, deliberate movements. "Okay," Bruce said softly, "but I have to ask you, do you want this to be a training fight, for points?" Sterling burst out laughing. Deep, guttural laugh. "Points? We don't fight for points. We fight until one of us can't stand up anymore." That was the answer Bruce was waiting for. The conditions were set. No rules, no referee, just violence. "Very well," Bruce replied. "Until one of us can no longer stand." The room seemed to shrink. The atmosphere became heavy. This was no longer a conference. It was an unauthorized duel on federal property. Bruce took half a step back. He changed his stance. For the first time, the officers noticed the change. The relaxed posture was gone. In its place was a spring ready to pounce. Bruce adopted his famous on-guard stance, right hand forward, chin tucked in, knees slightly bent, heel raised. He looked like a cobra raising its head. Sterling did not take a stance. He adopted a classic boxing guard, hands up, elbows in, chin down. It was a solid defense, worthy of a textbook. Against a boxer it was impenetrable, but he wasn't fighting a boxer. "Come on, go ahead," Sterling taunted, waving his front hand. "Hit me. Give me your best shot, movie star." Bruce remained motionless. He was employing a fundamental concept of Jeet Kune, the art of fighting without fighting. He was letting Sterling's anger do the work for him. He was waiting for him to commit. The silence lasted 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It was agonizing. Sterling, frustrated by Bruce's immobility, made a fatal mistake. He mistook patience for fear. He thought Bruce was paralyzed. "Coward," Sterling spat. He lunged. It wasn't a clumsy punch. It was a precise, disciplined left jab intended to knock Bruce's head back, followed immediately by a powerful right hook intended to knock him unconscious. It was a combination that had worked 100 times before for Sterling. It was fast, it was powerful. But to Bruce Lee, who was moving in a state of hyper-awareness, Sterling was moving in slow motion. This is the moment that separates masters from legends, the moment when time expands. Witnesses claim they didn't actually see Bruce move. One moment he was standing in front of Sterling. The next, the geometry of the room had completely changed. Bruce didn't block the jab. He didn't back up. He did something that went against every manual in the Navy library. He moved toward the attack. He intercepted it. Bruce dodged the punch by a hair's breadth, the force of the blow properly grazing his hair as he slipped. His front hand did not strike. It whipped through the air like a scorpion's tail. Crack! The sound was sickening. It wasn't the dull thud of a fist hitting muscle. It was the sharp crack of bone against bone. Bruce's back fist punch had hit Sterling's temple, but it wasn't just a punch. It was a shockwave. Sterling's head snapped to the side. The giant stopped, his eyes wide with confusion. His momentum was halted. But Bruce wasn't done. That was only the first note of the symphony. We are now 2 seconds into the 10-second fight. Sterling, dazed but still dangerous, tried to get back into position. He attempted to swing his enormous right arm, a blow that could have decapitated Bruce. Bruce was already in his guard. He was in the pocket, the danger zone. Bruce ducked. His leg shot out, delivering a low, violent kick to Sterling's front knee. Crack! Sterling groaned, his leg buckling under 240 pounds of weight. His structure collapsed. The tower began to lean. The crowd gasped, a collective gasp from 200 men. They couldn't understand what they were seeing. The silencer was being dismantled, and the actor hadn't even broken a sweat. Bruce followed up. He didn't stop to admire his work. He instantly transitioned from the low kick to a hand trap. He pinned Sterling's arms against his own chest, rendering the boxer's weapons useless. For a split second, they stood face to face. Bruce looked Sterling in the eyes. There was no anger in Bruce's gaze, only absolute, terrifying concentration. "You're too stiff," Bruce whispered. Then he finished his opponent. The trap was closed. Sterling was off balance, his knee compromised, his arms immobilized. He was a force of nature stripped of his power. Bruce released the trap on Sterling's arms, and in a movement too quick to follow, he lightly placed his right fingertips on Sterling's chest, just above the solar plexus. To the uninitiated, it looked like a light touch, a push. But the martial artists in the room, and there were a few hidden in the back, knew what was about to happen. They recognized the setup for the most famous technique in the history of Kung Fu, the 1-inch punch. But this wasn't the demonstration version Bruce used in exhibitions, where he would throw a volunteer onto a chair. This was the combat version. This one was designed to cause trauma. Bruce anchored himself to the ground. He connected his feet to the earth, creating a kinetic chain that started at his heels, ran up his legs, through his hips, and exploded out of his fist. He didn't pull his arm back. He simply extended. Boom! The sound was like a car door slamming. Sterling, weighing 240 pounds, didn't just fall backward. He took off. He left the ground. His feet left the floor. He flew backward through the air, traveling 5, 6, 8 feet. He crashed into the rows of chairs behind him. The metal chairs screeched and clattered as they scattered like bowling pins. The army giant rolled, did a somersault, and finally came to rest against the legs of a terrified admiral sitting in the second row. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Dust particles danced in the light above the platform. The stopwatch in everyone's mind stopped. 10 seconds. Exactly 10 seconds between the moment Sterling had called him a coward and the moment Sterling lay in a pile of overturned furniture. Bruce stood in the center of the stage. He hadn't pursued Sterling. He hadn't shouted. He had immediately returned to his neutral stance. He seemed calm, almost bored. He adjusted his cuff, smoothing a crease in the fabric. "Water can flow," Bruce said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a razor blade. "Or it can crash." He looked at the pile of chairs. "Be like water, my friend," Sterling groaned. The sound broke the spell. 2 Navy medics rushed to help the commander. He was conscious, but his eyes were glassy, unfocused. He tried to stand, but his legs were weak. He looked at Bruce with a mixture of confusion and something else, a pure, unadulterated fear. He had been struck by a ghost. The officers in the room were frozen. Their brains were trying to reconcile their reality with what they had just witnessed. They had seen bar fights. They had seen boxing matches. They had seen violence. But they had never seen perfection. Then it began. Slow applause. It came from the back of the room. It was Admiral Moore, the base commander. He rose slowly, his face grave. He applauded again. Then another officer rose. Then another. Then 5. Then 50. Within seconds, the room erupted. 200 Navy officers were standing, applause echoing off the walls. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of respect. They were cheering the man who had just destroyed one of their own. Because in that room, rank didn't matter. Only truth mattered. And they had just seen the truth. Bruce did not bow. He simply nodded his head in acknowledgement of their respect. He walked over to where Sterling was being helped into a chair. The room fell silent again, watching. Was he going to gloat? Was he going to add insult to injury? Bruce knelt beside the man who had tried to hurt him. He placed a hand on Sterling's shoulder. "You are strong," Bruce said softly, so that only Sterling and the men nearby could hear him. "Very strong. But strength without flexibility is rigor mortis. You were dead before you even threw the first punch." Sterling looked up at him, still panting. He nodded weakly. "I didn't see it," he stammered. "I didn't see anything." "Next time," Bruce smiled, and this time his smile was sincere. "Don't look with your eyes. Look with your mind." That precise moment was the crucial turning point in the story. If Bruce had simply walked away, he would have been a tough guy, a myth. But by kneeling down, by teaching the man he had defeated, he became a master. He wasn't there to humiliate Sterling. He was there to free him from his own limitations. The demonstration that followed the fight was unprecedented in naval history. Skepticism was gone. Arrogance was gone. For the next 2 hours, Bruce Lee held the entire Pacific Fleet in the palm of his hand. He didn't just show them punches and kicks. He showed them the biomechanics of violence. He explained how to use an opponent's energy against them. He demonstrated the telegraph-free punch, which involved striking a target before the brain has time to register the threat. He called for volunteers. Tall, fast men, and played with them, not out of cruelty but to illustrate his point. He would place a handkerchief in their hand and snatch it away before they could close their fingers. He would tell them exactly where he was going to hit them, then hit them there anyway, because they were simply unable to react quickly enough. But amid the admiration and applause, one person in the room was watching the scene with different intensity, a young ensign named James Turner. He wasn't watching the punches. He was watching Bruce's face. Turner noticed something that everyone else had missed, something that would reveal the true cost of that 10-second explosion. As Bruce wiped the sweat from his forehead, Turner noticed a slight tremor in Bruce's hand. Just a quiver, a vibration. Bruce was human. The adrenaline rush was real. The energy he had channeled to throw a 240-pound man into the air had put a strain on his nervous system. He was riding a lightning bolt, and even he could get burned. This detail is essential. It reminds us that Bruce was not a comic book superhero. He was a man who had trained his body to withstand supernatural levels of stress. At the end of the evening, Admiral Moore approached Bruce. He shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Lee," said the Admiral, "I've trained men for 30 years. I've seen killers, I've seen heroes, but I've never seen anyone like you." Bruce bowed. "Thank you, Admiral. We need you," Moore continued. "The Navy needs you. Whatever you teach, we want it." It was a job offer, a blank check. The US military wanted to weaponize Jeet Kune. Bruce's response was immediate, and it was typical of Bruce. "I can't teach you to be me. I can only help you find yourselves." But he glanced around the room at the officers now practicing hand-to-hand exercises, laughing, learning. "I can show you the way." That night, Bruce Lee didn't just win a fight. He forever changed the course of military hand-to-hand combat training. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next, in the parking lot, that's the part that truly haunts the witnesses. The double doors of the officers' club closed, trapping the noise and light inside. Outside, the San Diego night was cool and damp. A thick marine layer had rolled in from the Pacific, transforming the parking lot into a scene from a black and white crime movie. Bruce walked out with Dan Inosanto. His arrogance was gone. The dragon persona had been put back in the closet. Now he was just a guy in a tracksuit, carrying a gym bag, walking through the fog. But they weren't alone. Corporal James Turner, the young officer who had noticed Bruce's trembling hand earlier, had followed them outside. He didn't want an autograph. He didn't want a fight. He wanted an answer to a question that was nagging at him. He found Bruce leaning against the side of his car, a modest Chevrolet, not a limousine, his eyes fixed on a streetlight. Bruce was watching the moth circling the bulb. He seemed miles away. Turner hesitated, then stepped into the halo of yellow light. "Mr. Lee." Bruce didn't jump. He didn't turn around in a fighting stance. He slowly turned his head in a fluid motion, like oil on glass. "The show's over," My friend, Bruce said softly. No more magic tricks tonight. That's not it, Turner said, his voice slightly trembling. I watched you in there with Sterling. You were going to kill him. It was a bold statement, accusatory. Dan Inosanto stiffened, ready to intervene, but Bruce signaled him not to. He looked at the young ensign with his dark, deep eyes that seemed to reflect the wet sidewalk. I didn't kill him, Bruce replied. I saved him. You broke him, Turner retorted. You humiliated a commander. Bruce broke away from the car. He approached Turner until he was standing face to face with him. The difference in height was there, but Bruce felt like a giant. To learn to swim, Bruce murmured, you must first touch the water. To learn to fight, you must first touch the ground. Sterling thought he was invincible. That's a disease. I gave him the cure. Bruce tapped his own temple. Tonight he sleeps in pain, but tomorrow he'll wake up awake. Really awake for the first time in 10 years. He'll look in the mirror and see a man, not a rank. I gave him a gift. Turner was silent. He hadn't seen it that way. Then Bruce did something strange. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter. He held it up in the dim light. You saw the violence, Bruce said, but you missed the art. Look. Bruce placed the coin on his open palm. Catch it, he said to Turner. Before I closed my hand, Turner blinked. What? Catch it. Turner reached out his hand. He was young, fast, a fighter pilot in training. He had excellent reflexes. He tried to catch the coin. His hand closed on empty air. Bruce's hand was already closed into a fist. He opened it slowly. The coin was there, face up. Again, Bruce said. Turner tried again. He concentrated. He tensed his muscles. He lunged forward. Nothing. Bruce's hand was closed before Turner's brain could even send the signal to his fingers. You're trying too hard, Bruce sighed. You're desperate. Desperation is loud. It screams at your opponent. You have to be silent. He tossed the coin to Turner. This time the ensign caught it. That punch inside. Bruce gestured toward the club. It wasn't fast because I'm superhuman. It was fast because I had no intention. I wasn't thinking about winning. I wasn't thinking about hurting. I was just acting. When you clap your hands, do you think about the aerodynamics of your palms? No, you just clap. Fighting should be the same. Bruce opened the car door. He paused one last time, looking back at the naval base, a fortress of steel and concrete. The Navy builds ships to withstand the ocean, Bruce said, his voice barely audible in the rain. I teach men to be the ocean. He got into the car. The engine started. And just like that, the legend drove away into the San Diego fog, leaving a perplexed ensign standing in the rain, holding a coin as if it were a sacred relic. This conversation in the parking lot was never recorded. It exists only in James Turner's diary, discovered years later by his grandchildren. But it provides us with the missing piece of the puzzle. Inside the ring, Bruce was the destroyer. Outside, he was the philosopher. The physical and the mental, yin and yang. But the repercussions of that night were just beginning to spread. The fight with Sterling wasn't the end. It was the match that lit the fuse. A fuse that would burn all the way to Washington, D.C., and ultimately to the jungles of Vietnam. Because the Navy didn't just fill out a report and forget about it. They realized they had stumbled upon a weapon they didn't understand. And the US military doesn't like things it doesn't understand. 3 weeks after the incident, a black sedan pulled up outside Bruce Lee's house in Los Angeles. 2 men in suits got out. They weren't from the Navy. They belonged to the agency in charge of special warfare. They had heard the rumors about this man who could fly through the air and strike faster than lightning. They wanted to know if it was true. They wanted to know if it could be replicated. Bruce Lee was about to be invited into the secret world of government special operations training. The men in the black sedan weren't there to arrest Bruce. They were there to recruit him. History tells us that Bruce Lee taught celebrities like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But records from late 1966 and early 1967 suggest a different list of students. A list that was not published in Black Belt magazine. The visitors were liaison officers from the US Special Forces. They had read Admiral Moore's report on the San Diego incident. The report described a man capable of neutralizing a threat in 0.2 seconds and generating force disproportionate to his body mass. They made Bruce an offer. Come to their bases, train their hand-to-hand combat instructors, help them rewrite the manuals for the Vietnam War. Bruce accepted, but on his own terms. He would not enlist in the army. He would not cut his hair. He would come as a consultant, a saifu for soldiers. What happened next is one of the most fascinating, but often overlooked chapters of his life. Bruce Lee began secretly training members of the Green Berets and the CIA's Special Activities Division. Imagine the scene. You have seasoned soldiers, men who have killed in the jungle, men who know the smell of war, and standing before them is this actor. But after San Diego, word had gotten around. No one challenged him anymore. No one asked him to prove himself. Instead, they took notes. An account that has come down to us from a training session at Fort Bragg describes Bruce demonstrating the finger jab to the eyes. The eyes, Bruce told the soldiers, are the windows of the soul. But in combat they are just easy targets. You don't hit a helmet. You don't hit a bulletproof vest. You hit where there is no armor. He wasn't teaching them martial arts. He was teaching them survival. He eliminated high kicks. He eliminated spectacular moves. He taught them to bite, to gouge eyes, to end a life in the blink of an eye if their rifle jammed. But a shadow was beginning to loom. The military loved Bruce. They wanted to clone him. But Bruce began to feel the weight of what he was teaching. In the San Diego parking lot, he told Ensign Turner that he had saved Sterling. But the techniques he was teaching the Special Forces had nothing to do with saving anyone. They were designed to kill efficiently. Bruce was a philosopher. He believed that martial arts were a means of self-discovery, not just destruction. He began to distance himself. He realized that if he continued down this path, his art, Jeet Kune, would become just another weapon in the government's arsenal. He didn't want to be an arms dealer. He wanted to be an artist. At the end of 1967, the invitations to the bases stopped, not because the army no longer wanted him, but because Bruce had stopped accepting them. He had disappeared from the US government's radar. He refocused on Hollywood, on the big screen. Why? Because he had understood something profound. By teaching soldiers, he could change a few hundred men. But by making movies, he could change the world. He could plant the seeds of his philosophy in the minds of millions. He preferred the camera to classified files. But the legend of the San Diego fight refused to die. It became a ghost story in the Navy. New recruits whispered about it in the mess hall. The day the dragon came. The 10-second fight. It became a cautionary tale for all the arrogant officers who thought rank equaled toughness. And Commander Sterling, the man who had been thrown into the air, his story didn't end in that pile of chairs. In fact, his story is the most surprising part of this whole saga. Because 6 months after the fight, a package arrived at Bruce Lee's home in Culver City. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a threat. It was a small wooden box. Inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Lee, you were right. I was dead before I threw the first punch. Thank you for waking me up. Jack Sterling. And beneath the note was something even more surprising, a medal. Sterling's Navy Cross, awarded for valor in combat during the Korean War. He was giving it to Bruce. The note continued, I've been carrying this for 15 years, thinking it made me invincible. Now I know better. Strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you can build. I'm learning to swim in your ocean. Bruce kept that medal for the rest of his life. It reminded him that the greatest victories aren't won through violence, but through transformation. Sometimes the most powerful punch is the one that opens a man's mind instead of closing his eyes. November 14, 1966, 10 seconds that changed a man's life, 10 seconds that transformed military training, 10 seconds that proved water could indeed crash with the force of a tsunami. Commander Jack, the silencer, Sterling never fought again, not because he couldn't, but because he no longer needed to. He had learned the ultimate lesson: the strongest warrior is the one who wins without fighting. And Bruce Lee, he had proven something that would echo through history. That true power doesn't come from size or strength or rank. It comes from understanding. It comes from precision. It comes from being like water. 10 seconds, one fight, a legend born not from violence, but from the wisdom that followed. The silencer had found his voice, and Bruce Lee had found his calling.